I found the ring weeks after Whitney killed our future. But the shift really started the night I decided to play by her rules. My girlfriend said, "I just see you as a friend now." So I treated her like one, no touch, no plans, no priority. I canceled our anniversary dinner, and her face said everything. It began on our balcony, the mountains purple against a September sky. The air was crisp, the wine expensive, and I was foolish enough to believe we were building a life. I made the mistake. I started talking about the future like it was tangible. I had been browsing Zillow for a house in Park Hill, a place with a yard big enough for a dog and maybe a swing set. I turned my phone to show her, grinning. The way her wine glass paused halfway to her lips was my first clue. She stared at the screen, not with excitement, but with the panicked look of a student asked to solve a calculus problem. She set the glass down and said, "We needed to talk inside." The conversation wasn't a fight, which made it infinitely worse. Whitney had clearly been rehearsing this speech for weeks. She laid it out calmly, like a business presentation. She loved me, just not in the way that leads to mortgages. She didn't want marriage or kids, or maybe she did, but not with me. She used the word expectations like it was a slur. I was just a comfortable habit she wasn't ready to quit. She seemed confused about why I looked like I'd been hit by a truck. "I thought you'd appreciate the honesty," she said, leaning back as if she'd done me a favor. She explained that the spark was gone, replaced by something safe. "We're more like best friends now, or really good roommates," she offered with a bright, terrifying smile. She wanted the domestic perks, splitting rent, emotional support, without the burden of commitment. It was a demotion disguised as an evolution, and she waited for me to agree. I sat there doing math in my head. Not the financial kind, though that would come later, but the life kind. I added up every compromise and every small investment I had made in a shared destiny she had never actually bought into. The number that kept coming up was zero. I had spent 4 years building a foundation on quicksand. Whitney watched me, expecting a debate or a plea. Instead, the gears in my head stopped grinding and simply locked into place. "Okay," I said, my voice flat. "If we are roommates, we should act like it." That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I took a pillow to the couch, lying in the dark, while the ceiling fan spun overhead. Lying next to someone who just told you they don't love you feels like volunteering for torture. I stared at the shadows, feeling a strange, cold clarity wash over me. She wanted a roommate, so I would give her that. My lease on us had expired. The morning sun hit the living room floor, exposing the dust bunnies under the couch where I'd spent the night. I didn't make coffee for 2. That was a partner ritual, and partners were extinct here. Instead, I waited for the hiss of the shower to start down the hall. It was the signal I needed. Whitney was in there, washing away the guilt of demolishing our life, likely rehearsing how great we were going to be as friends. I stood up, my back stiff, and walked toward the bedroom with empty laundry baskets. I moved with the efficiency of a crime scene cleaner. I opened the closet and started pulling my shirts from the hangers. The friction of the fabric was the only sound in the room. I didn't slam drawers or throw things. I simply relocated my existence. My suits, my running gear, the shoe rack that sat next to hers. Everything went into the baskets. I carried them across the hall to the small office that doubled as storage. It smelled like printer toner and stale air, but it was mine. I claimed the space. The shower water cut off, leaving a ringing silence. I was just plugging in my phone charger by the guest bed when the bathroom door opened. Steam billowed out, followed by Whitney in a towel, her hair wrapped up. She walked into the master bedroom humming something soft, probably expecting to find me making breakfast or sulking in the kitchen. Then the humming stopped. I watched from the hallway as she stared at the gaping hole in the closet where my life used to be. The empty hangers swung slightly, like pendulums marking the time of death. She spun around, her face flushed from the heat and sudden confusion. "Graham, what are you doing?" She gestured wildly at the empty space. "Did you pack? Are you leaving?" Panic flickered in her eyes, but it wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of losing the script she had written. I leaned against the doorframe of the guest room, crossing my arms. "I am not leaving the apartment," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am just moving into my room. You said we were roommates." "Roommates don't share a closet or a bed." Her expression hardened instantly, the panic replaced by annoyance. "You are being childish," she snapped, tightening the towel around her chest. "Just because we're shifting the dynamic doesn't mean you have to act like a stranger. We can still be close. I just need space to breathe, without the pressure of forever hanging over me." She really believed it. She wanted the intimacy of a husband with the freedom of a single woman. "I am giving you space," I countered. "This is exactly what you asked for. The guest room is my space now." I closed the door before she could argue further, shutting out her indignant face. I sat on the narrow twin mattress and looked around the cramped room. Boxes of old files were stacked in the corner. The window looked out at a brick wall instead of the mountains. It should have been depressing. It should have felt like a demotion. But as I sat there, I felt something unexpected bloom in my chest. It wasn't anger or sorrow. It was relief. Deep, lung, expanding relief. I didn't have to try anymore. The performance was finally over. I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar app. The notification was still there, sitting on next Friday, like a taunt. Anniversary dinner. 7 p.m. It was at the steakhouse she had been dying to try, the one requiring a reservation 3 months in advance. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel a pang of regret. I tapped the event, hit delete, and confirmed the cancellation with the restaurant app. A confirmation email popped up instantly. Down the hall, I heard Whitney turn on her hairdryer. She thought she was setting boundaries, but she didn't realize boundaries work both ways. Tuesday evening felt like a standoff. I sat at the kitchen island. The cold quartz pressing against my forearms, my laptop open to a fresh Excel sheet. Whitney was in the living room watching reality television, the volume low enough that I could hear the click of my keys. I wasn't just paying bills, I was conducting an autopsy on the last 4 years. I tracked every flight I covered, every vet bill for the cat she wanted, and the car repairs. The final sum blinked in bold at the bottom. $18,473. Whitney wandered in during a commercial break, looking for a snack. She saw the spreadsheet and frowned, leaning over my shoulder to read the screen. "What is all this? Are you budgeting?" Her voice was casual, assuming our finances were still a shared pot despite the breakup. "I am restructuring," I said, sliding the printed summary toward her. It wasn't a request. It was an invoice. Since we are roommates now, I've calculated the split based on current market rates. Rent is 50-50. Utilities are 50-50. We need to separate grocery accounts immediately. She picked up the paper like it was coated in poison. Her eyes scanned the columns, widening as she reached the bottom totals. "You calculated gas money from 2021. She asked, her voice rising an octave. "Graham, This is insane. You are charging me for being your girlfriend. I didn't flinch. I am showing you what I covered as a partner. I am not asking for the 18 grand back. That's a sunk cost. But going forward, friends split the check. You wanted independence, Whitney. This is what it costs. She crumpled the paper in her fist, her face turning a splotchy red. This is financial abuse! You know I make less than you. You are doing this to punish me for being honest about my feelings. She threw the paper at my chest. It bounced harmlessly off my laptop. It's not punishment, I said, closing the screen. It's equality. Roommates don't subsidize each other's lifestyles based on income brackets. If you want the roommate arrangement, you accept the roommate bills. You can't have the perks without the title. The air in the apartment remained toxic for an hour, heavy with unspoken insults. Then, the smell of garlic and basil began to drift from the kitchen. Whitney was cooking. Not just heating something up, but making her spicy vodka pasta, the dish she usually saved for apologies or anniversaries. She was clanging pots a little too loudly. A performance of domesticity designed to remind me of what I was being so cold about. She plated 2 bowls, the steam rising in the dim light, and set the table with care. Dinner's ready. She called out, her voice softened, stripped of the earlier rage. She was leaning against the counter, wearing a tank top that showed off her shoulders. It was a trap, baited with comfort and nostalgia. I walked into the kitchen, but I didn't sit. I pulled a $20 bill from my wallet and placed it next to the steaming bowl. That smells great, I said, my tone polite but distant. That covers my share of the groceries and the labor. Thanks for cooking, friend. I took the bowl and walked toward the guest room, leaving her standing alone at the set table. Her face crumbled, not with anger this time, but with pure shock. She had expected the pasta to bridge the gap, to make us again for an hour. Instead, I had turned a romantic gesture into a transaction. I closed my door, and the sound of her fork hitting her plate in the empty kitchen echoed like a gunshot. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the quiet of a bank vault. The peace treaty dissolved on a Thursday afternoon, when reality crashed into Whitney's world. I was working in the guest room when she burst in, holding her MacBook like a wounded bird. The screen was black, completely dead. She had a client presentation due in 2 hours and her cloud backup hadn't synced since Tuesday. You need to fix this, she pleaded, her eyes wide and wet with genuine fear. You know how to reset the logic board. Please, Graham. In the past, I would have already been unscrewing the case, saving her from her own lack of preparation. Today, I just kept typing, the click of my mechanical keyboard filling the room. I don't have the tools anymore. I lied, though my toolkit was clearly visible on the shelf behind me. But there is a Best Buy 10 minutes away. The Geek Squad opens at 9. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, waiting for the punchline. I can't afford a repair right now, she whispered, the panic shifting into sharp anger. I need you to buy me a new one. I can't lose this client. I'll pay you back when my bonus hits next month. I shook my head slowly, not looking up from my monitor. Friends don't lend friends $2,000 for electronics, I said calmly. That is a partner privilege. You made it very clear that those privileges were suffocating you. The rejection hit her physically. She recoiled, clutching the dead laptop to her chest as if shielding it from my cruelty. You are enjoying this, she hissed, backing out of the room. You actually want me to fail. She slammed the door so hard the frame rattled, leaving me in the silence of my self-imposed exile. I checked the Best Buy financing page on my browser and texted her the link. It was petty, perhaps, but accuracy is rarely kind. That night, the apartment was quiet, but the digital world was screaming. I saw the first post while heating up leftovers. It was a photo of a stormy sky on her Instagram story, captioned with vague quotes about surviving narcissists and financial coercion. She didn't name me. Of course, she was too smart for that, but the comments were filling up with support from our mutual friends. "You are so brave," Tessa wrote. "Know your worth, queen," another added. An hour later, she shared an article titled, "Signs You Are Dating a Sociopath." She highlighted the section on withholding affection and resources. My phone buzzed with a notification, then another. People were seeing this. People we had barbecued with last month were now liking comments that painted me as a monster. I sat in the dark kitchen, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. I didn't block her. I didn't comment. I took screenshots. The virtual war bled into reality the next morning at the gym. I ran into Mike, a guy I played pickup basketball with every Saturday. I nodded a greeting near the water fountain, expecting a fist bump. Instead, Mike looked at his shoes, mumbled something about being in a rush, and walked to the other side of the weight room. The air around me had changed. I was radioactive. Whitney wasn't just venting. She was systematically dismantling my reputation. The isolation felt physical, like a thick glass wall between me and the rest of Denver. I was sitting on my balcony, watching the city lights, when my phone vibrated against the metal table. It was Logan, my oldest friend in the city, and the one guy I thought might hold out. His message was short, devoid of emojis or pleasantries. "Man, I am hearing some crazy stuff. Whitney is saying you cut her off to starve her out. Tell me that isn't true." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could have typed a defensive paragraph or called him to yell about loyalty. But words are malleable. They can be twisted by whoever tells the story first. Facts, however, are stubborn things. I closed the messaging app and opened my photo gallery. I found the folder I had named Insurance 3 weeks ago. It was time to stop being the villain in a story I never wrote. I selected 3 specific images. The first image was a screenshot of Whitney's initial text. "I just need us to be roommates. No expectations. No future talk." The second was the spreadsheet, showing I had covered $18,000 of her expenses. The third was my polite text explaining the new 50-50 split. I hit send. The 3 bubbles swooshed onto the screen, followed by a caption. "She set the terms, Logan. I just followed them. Read the timestamps." Then, I put the phone down face up. The 3 dots of the typing indicator appeared almost immediately, then vanished. He was reading. He was showing his girlfriend, Sarah. He was likely scrolling back up to check the dates. The silence stretched for 2 minutes, longer than any conversation we'd ever had. I watched a moth batter itself against the porch light, wondering if I had just nuked my entire social circle or saved it. Finally, the phone buzzed again. A single line, "Jesus. I didn't know she said that." The ripple effect was instantaneous and digital. Within an hour, I checked Instagram from my burner account. The story about narcissists was gone. The post about financial abuse had been deleted. Even the supportive comments on her selfies had thinned out. The insurance folder had done its job. I wasn't just clearing my name. I was exposing the architecture of her lie. The notifications on my phone stopped completely. The silence wasn't isolation anymore. It was the quiet of a cease-fire. The front door unlocked around 10. Whitney walked in, tossing her keys into the bowl with a hollow clatter. She wasn't wearing her usual oversized sweats. She was in the black dress I used to love, her hair done up, makeup flawless. She looked like she was dressed for a victory lap that had been canceled mid-stride. She saw me in the kitchen and froze. Her eyes darted to my phone on the counter, then back to my face. She knew. She didn't scream or accuse me of betraying her privacy. Instead, she slumped onto a bar stool, the fight draining out of her posture like water from a cracked vase. "Tessa isn't answering my texts," she whispered, staring at her hands. It was the first honest thing she had said in weeks. "I guess you showed everyone the spreadsheet." I took a sip of water, feeling the cool liquid coat my throat. "I didn't show everyone," I said softly. "Just the jury." The knock on the door Saturday morning wasn't the polite tap of a delivery driver. It was a heavy, authoritative thud. I opened it to find Dan and Patricia standing on the welcome mat, flanked by overnight bags like they were moving in. Whitney hovered behind them, eyes red-rimmed, looking small and vindicated. "We need to talk, Graham," Dan said, bypassing a greeting entirely. He stepped into the apartment with the confidence of a landlord, surveying the lack of clutter. It wasn't a casual visit, it was a raid. I didn't panic. I gestured to the kitchen table, the neutral ground where treaties are signed or broken. Patricia sat with her purse clutched in her lap, her knuckles light against the leather. She looked at me like I was a stranger who had stolen her son-in-law's face. "Whitney called us," she began, her voice tremble with restrained accusation. "She says you are having a breakdown. That you've become controlling and cold." I poured 3 mugs of black coffee and sat down. "I am perfectly fine, Patricia," I said calmly. Dan leaned forward, his elbows resting heavily on the table. He was a good man, usually, but he had been fed a poisoned script. "This isn't like you, son. Keeping score. Refusing to help with simple things. You don't treat a partner that way." He shook his head, disappointment radiating off him like heat. "Relationships take work. You can't just shut down because things get rocky. We're worried about your mental state." Whitney nodded beside him, playing the victim perfectly. She needed them to believe I was broken. I let him finish. I let the silence stretch until the refrigerator compressor hummed into life. I could have argued. I could have shouted about the bedroom arrangement or the canceled dinner. But Dan and Patricia were old school. They respected documentation over emotion. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, unlocking it with a deliberate swipe. "I agree, Dan," I said softly. "You shouldn't treat a partner that way. But I haven't been a partner for 4 weeks." I placed the phone in the center. The screen was bright in the morning gloom, displaying the text thread from that first night on the balcony. "Read it," I said. "Not just the recent stuff. Scroll up to the 12th of September. Patricia hesitated, glancing at Whitney, who suddenly looked like she wanted to vanish into the floorboards. Patricia picked up the device. Her eyes scanned the blue bubbles, widening as she read Whitney's monologue about losing the spark and wanting freedom. She read the part about roommates out loud, her voice faltering on the word. The atmosphere in the kitchen curdled instantly. Patricia passed the phone to Dan without looking at him. Dan read it slower, his brow furrowing as he processed the words. He wasn't seeing a mental breakdown anymore. He was seeing his daughter's cold rejection of me. He looked up, his face flushed with second-hand embarrassment. "You told him you didn't see a future?" Dan asked, turning to Whitney. His tone wasn't angry yet, but it was heavy with the weight of wasted time. The intervention was pivoting rapidly. Whitney stammered, her hands fluttering nervously.
I was just being honest.
I felt trapped. I thought we could find a new rhythm. She looked to her mother for support, but Patricia was staring at the wall, processing the humiliation of dragging luggage across town to defend a lie. You told us, he snapped. Patricia whispered, the accusation sharp. You said he was punishing you for no reason. You didn't say you broke up with him first. The narrative Whitney had built was collapsing under the weight of evidence. Dan rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of profound exhaustion. He looked at the overnight bags by the door, then at me. I apologize, Graham, he said, his voice gruff. We were given incomplete information. He didn't look at Whitney. He couldn't. He realized he had been weaponized against a man who had done nothing but agree to his daughter's terms. The shame in the room was palpable, thick enough to taste. Whitney shrank in her chair, realizing her reinforcements had just defected. Patricia stood up, smoothing her skirt with jerky, angry motions. We aren't staying, she announced, the decision final. And I think it's best if Whitney comes with us for a few days. It wasn't an offer. It was a command. She looked at her daughter, with a mix of love and severe disappointment. You need to figure out what you actually want, Whitney. Because you can't have it both ways. The intervention had successfully identified the problem in the relationship, but it wasn't me. Watching them pack Whitney into their sedan felt surreal. She looked back at the apartment window as they drove away, her face a mask of regret. I stood in the doorway, the coffee in my mug now cold. I should have felt victorious. I had won the argument and cleared my name. But as the car disappeared around the corner, I only felt a heavy, final sadness. They hadn't come to save our relationship. They had just come to collect the debris of what we broke. 3 days later, the front door clicked open. Whitney walked in carrying a small duffel bag, looking like a traveler returning from a failed expedition. The silence in the apartment was thick, built on 72 hours of total absence. She didn't turn on the television or go to the kitchen to check the fridge. She just sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly between her knees. I stayed in the armchair, marking my territory in the living room. We need to talk, she said, her voice stripped of all performance. She started talking, staring at the rug pattern instead of me. She told me about the blogs she had been reading late at night. They were articles written by relationship experts who preached about the art of the chase. The theory was simple and toxic. Men only value what they have to fight for. If a relationship becomes too stable, the man gets complacent. She believed I had stopped trying because things were easy. The advice was to create a crisis, pull away, and force me to reconquer her. It was a test. Graham, she whispered, finally looking up. Her eyes were pleading for me to understand the twisted logic. She expected me to refuse the roommate label. She wanted me to fight, to plan romantic dates, to prove I couldn't live without her. My acceptance of her terms wasn't respect in her eyes. It was failure. Every time I slept in the guest room, or split a bill, I was failing the test. She manufactured a breakup to save us, but she destroyed us instead. I sat there, feeling the blood drain from my face. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a profound, sickening nausea. I realized that my pain over the last month had been orchestrated. The sleepless nights, the humiliation at the gym, the intervention with her parents, it was all collateral damage in a game I didn't know I was playing. She had gambled 4 years of history on internet advice. You didn't want a partner, I said, my voice cold. You wanted a contestant. And I don't play games. She scrambled to unzip the side pocket of her bag. I was going to fix it. She insisted, her hands shaking. She pulled out a small black velvet box. Inside sat a simple platinum band, heavy and masculine. I bought this 2 months ago. The plan was, once you fought for me, once you proved you really wanted this, I was going to propose to you. I wanted to be sure. She held it out like an offering, a prize for a race I had refused to run. I looked at the platinum band, gleaming under the recessed lighting. It was a beautiful ring, likely expensive. Purchase she claimed not to have. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. She was planning a marriage while actively simulating a divorce. She wanted to build a forever home on a foundation of manipulation. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, dark and sharp. You bought a wedding ring while telling me you just wanted to be roommates, I asked. The absurdity was almost impressive. I stood up slowly. Wait right here, I said. Whitney watched me with a flicker of hope, thinking perhaps I was going to get the platinum band and put it on. I walked to the guest room, to the dresser I had moved from the master bedroom. In the back of the sock drawer, hidden inside a pair of winter wools, was a small wooden box. I had bought it in July. I carried it back to the living room, the wood warm against my palm. I placed my box on the coffee table next to hers. I flipped the lid open. The vintage princess, cut diamond caught the light, sparkling with a clarity that our relationship lacked. It was the exact style she had pointed out in a window last year. Whitney gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The sound was wet and choked. There they sat, 2 rings representing 2 completely different realities. One born of a manipulative test, the other born of a trust that had already been executed. You were going to ask me, she wailed, the tears finally spilling over. When? I looked at the diamond, feeling absolutely nothing for it now. It was just a rock. Our anniversary, I said. The dinner you made me cancel. That was the night. She curled in on herself, sobbing into her knees. The tragedy wasn't that we missed the timing. The tragedy was that she had everything she wanted. The commitment, the future, the love. And she threw it away to see if it would bounce. I closed the wooden box with a soft snap. I wasn't going to offer it to her. That version of me didn't exist anymore. The test is over, Whitney, I said, picking up my ring. And you got your answer. You pushed me away to see if I would come back. I am not coming back. I walked to the guest room and locked the door. Behind me, her crying was loud and desperate, but it sounded like it was coming from a great distance. I was already gone. The lease ended in a flurry of cardboard. Moving day wasn't a fight. It was a surrender. My sister Jordan helped me load the truck, keeping a protective eye on me. Whitney stood by the door, arms wrapped around herself. She tried to talk about closure, but I was exhausted. I gave her a hug that felt like a funeral service, acknowledging the loss without promising resurrection. I really did love you, she whispered. I didn't say it back. Some doors only open one way. I climbed into the truck and turned the key. The engine roared, drowning out any last-minute regrets. In the side mirror, I watched Whitney shrink until she was a speck, then nothing. I didn't feel the crushing weight I expected. Instead, I felt my lungs expand. Drawing in air that belonged solely to me, I drove toward Park Hill, toward a house I didn't have to justify. The radio was off. I just listened to the tires humming on the asphalt, singing a song of departure. 6 months later, the September sun hits differently in a backyard you own. I sat on my patio, watching the light fade over the Rockies. The grass was freshly cut, the smell of chlorophyll hanging in the air. It wasn't the exact house I had shown Whitney, but it was close. It had the yard for a dog, though I hadn't gotten one yet. I was learning to enjoy the space without rushing to fill it. Solitude, I discovered, wasn't the same thing as loneliness. It was peace. My phone buzzed on the armrest. A text from a number I hadn't deleted but never called. Thinking of you. Hope the new place is good. Whitney. A breadcrumb. A test to see if the door was unlocked. Old Graham would have analyzed the subtext, or felt a spike of guilt. New Graham swiped the notification away without opening it. I took a sip of my beer. The liquid was cold and sharp. It tasted better when you didn't have to calculate the cost. A moment later, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from a dating app. A woman named Ashley had replied to my message. She was funny, direct, and had a smile that didn't look like it was hiding a strategy. I am not looking for games. Her profile read, just tacos and honesty. I smiled, typing back a suggestion for a taqueria downtown. It felt strange to flirt without fear, to engage with someone who didn't view affection as a currency to be hoarded. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky a bruised purple. I looked at my hands, resting steady on my knees. I used to think love was about enduring pain to prove your worth. I thought if I carried enough weight, she would eventually help me lift it. I was wrong. Love doesn't ask you to break your back for validation. I stood up and walked into my house, closing the sliding glass door behind me. The lock clicked, secure.